Welcome LYRIC volunteers. We've created this video just to give you an example of what a LYRIC presentation can look like so that you feel a little bit more confident when you go into the classroom in person. So feel free to watch this before your first presentation and come back and watch it again at any other time if you find it helpful. So thank you for your willingness to volunteer. I'm sure the students that you teach will find it very informative and useful, and good luck on the rest of your LYRIC journey. Hi everyone, and welcome to this presentation of LYRIC, which stands for Learn Your Rights in the Community. My name is Ian Farrell. I'm a law professor at the University of Denver Sturm College of Law, where I teach and do research in criminal law, criminal procedure, and constitutional law. The purpose of these presentations is for you to know your rights when confronted by police. But we want to do more than just teach you the legal rules on paper or in the abstract. We want to give you practical knowledge and guidance on how to safely exercise your rights when confronted by police. It's an unfortunate fact of life in America today that interactions with the police have the potential for physical harm, especially for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. Our goal with this presentation is to empower you to protect your legal rights, but in a way that also protects you physically when interacting with police and other law enforcement. As we go through this presentation, I will occasionally ask you some questions, and you should also feel free to raise your hand at any time if you have a question or comment. The presentation works best when it is more like a conversation between all of us rather than just me droning on the whole time. One of the resources we give to youth who attend our presentations are these Give 'em 5 cards. They have the 5 main things you should remember when confronted by police. They are the size of business cards and can be kept in a purse or wallet so that you can use them if you forget what to do or say. Though you should always tell police what you're doing before reaching into your pockets. The cards are in English on one side and Spanish on the other, and we're also getting them printed in other languages. If you would like some Give 'em 5 cards, please send us an email at the address listed on this PowerPoint demonstration. Before we start talking about the technicalities of the law, I first want to show you a short video about how the power of your voice connects to the power of your rights.
To the youth of Denver, let's write a love letter to our voices.
My voice is a canyon.
My voice is the sun itself.
My voice is power.
My voice is action.
To hear my voice is a privilege.
To use my voice is the greatest choice.
But my silence, oh, my silence is deafening.
My silence is an action too.
When I speak,
I am brilliant, I am safe, I am secure.
When I am silent,
I am brilliant, I am safe, I am secure.
So when a siren sounds,
and the fear sets in,
my voice is the invitation of my own safety.
I not only want to be safe,
but commit myself to keep my safety mine.
my voice is the invocation.
And the spell is this.
am I free to leave?
If I am free, I will leave.
I choose to remain silent.
I want a lawyer.
I do not consent to the search of my body.
I do not consent to the search of my things.
Our voice is our right.
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 The choice to speak or remain silent.
is an act of love.
I love my voice, so I choose my voice.
90% of youth waive their right to silence without even knowing what it means to do so, without understanding the choice. If we protect ourselves, we prioritize our voice, we prioritize our strength.
In order to invoke your rights,
You have to find your voice.
Let's find it and use it together.
As I mentioned earlier, safety is your number one priority when contacted by the police. We encourage you to protect your legal rights, but you should do so in a calm and respectful manner. You should never physically fight or resist a police officer. Instead, you should invoke your rights. That way, if necessary, your lawyer can fight for you in court, where you have a much better chance of winning and you aren't in danger of being physically hurt.
Why is it my responsibility to be polite and respectful if a cop stops me for no reason?
That's a great question. In an ideal world, the police would be the ones keeping us safe from other dangers, rather than us having to be worried about being safe from the police. But the most important thing is that you protect yourself. So even if a police officer is being rude or doing something wrong, you should remain calm and respectful for your own well-being. Unfortunately, being disrespectful or impolite to a police officer can escalate the encounter and result in a dangerous situation. When we talk about your rights, we're talking about the rights that are guaranteed to you under the United States Constitution. Every government official has to give you these rights. This includes all law enforcement officers, such as police officers and even immigration and customs officers. It's very important to know that these constitutional rights belong to everyone in the United States, regardless of whether they're residents, citizens, or even undocumented. If you're inside US borders, you have these rights. For example, as you may have guessed listening to me talk, I'm not an American citizen, but I have just the same constitutional rights as anyone who was born here or became a US citizen. You might also be wondering whether youth have the same rights as adults. Well, when it comes to contact with law enforcement, you do have the same rights as adults. Sometimes they will apply slightly differently because of different contexts. For example, when you're at school. But I'll cover that later in the presentation. As I mentioned a moment ago, we're talking about your constitutional rights. The rights that apply when you're confronted by police are contained in the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments of the US Constitution. The first of these that we'll discuss is the 4th Amendment, which applies to searches and seizures. More specifically, the 4th Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures.
What do you mean by a search?
I think I know what a search is, but what's a seizure?
These are both great questions. A search is pretty self-explanatory. It's anything a police officer does to get information, like looking in your bag or in your car, or touching your body to feel if you are carrying any weapons or illegal items. A seizure is whenever a police officer seizes something. That is, when they take something that belongs to you. Police can seize your bag or your car, but most importantly, they can seize you. They can stop you from leaving by detaining you or arresting you. That's why the 4th Amendment is so important. It tells the police when they are allowed and not allowed to search your stuff and take you into custody. And what's important to remember about the 4th Amendment is that it doesn't say the police aren't allowed to search or seize you. It only says that if they do search or seize you, it must be reasonable. So now you're probably wondering, when is it reasonable for the police to search or seize you? Well, that's what we're going to figure out in the next few minutes, starting with a few questions for you to answer. The first question is, can a police officer approach you on the street and ask you questions? The possible answers are yes, always, no, never, or only if I've done something wrong.
Yes, always.
No, never.
Only if I've done something wrong.
The correct answer is yes, always. If you're in public, a police officer can always approach you and ask you questions. A useful rule of thumb is that police can do anything that an ordinary person is allowed to do. And an ordinary person can approach you and ask you questions. For example, I could approach you and ask you questions like, do you think the Broncos will have a good team this season? There's no law against that. Now, you might think, who's this random middle-aged white dude asking me questions? And you may not want to answer. And guess what? You don't have to answer. Well, the police are just like random middle-aged white dudes. With a couple of exceptions, you don't have to answer their questions either. There are only two things you must tell a police officer. You must tell the police your correct name and your correct date of birth. Police will often ask you for an ID, but unless you're driving, all you need to do is tell them your name and date of birth.
What happens if I don't give the officer that information?
What if I just give my brother's name instead?
It is very important that you tell them your correct name and date of birth. Refusing to tell the police your name and date of birth, or giving them a false name or date of birth, is a crime. So even if you're doing nothing wrong when the police approach you, but lie about who you are, now you've committed a crime and could end up in significant trouble. But these are the only things you must tell the police. Other than giving them your name and date of birth when they ask, you should not answer any other questions. Instead, you should invoke your right to silence. And the best way to do this is to actually say, I want to remain silent. You might think the best way to use your right to remain silent is just to remain silent. While this is common sense, it's actually not the best way to respond to the police. If you just stay silent, the police will keep asking you questions. So instead, it's better to actually say out loud, I want to remain silent. In fact, I encourage you to practice it right now. Say out loud, I want to remain silent.
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 You may feel silly saying this out loud, but if you practice it now, it will be much easier to say if you're ever confronted by a policeman.
What if I forget to say this and instead start answering other questions?
Is it too late to stop?
No, it isn't too late to stop. You can always refuse to answer any more questions by saying, I want to remain silent. And you can always say you want a lawyer. Even if you've already answered some questions, that doesn't mean you have to answer any more questions. Okay, so now we know that a cop can approach you in public at any time, that you have to tell them your name and date of birth if they ask, but other than that, you should say, I want to remain silent. At that point, you might also want to leave. So the next question is, if a police officer approaches you on the street, can they stop you from leaving? The possible answers are yes, always, no, never, and yes, if the officer thinks you have done something wrong.
Yes, always.
No, never.
Yes, if the officer thinks that I've done something wrong.
The correct answer is C, if the officer thinks you have done something wrong. This is called reasonable suspicion. A police officer can stop you from leaving if they have a reason to believe that you've done something wrong. It's very important to remember that a police officer might have a reason to suspect that you've done something wrong, even if you haven't done anything wrong. For example, you might match the description of someone who committed a crime nearby. They might be the same size and wearing similar clothes. Even though you're innocent, the police can detain you. Most of the time, when police come up to you, they don't tell you whether you're being detained or whether they have reasonable suspicion that you're doing something wrong. So what should you do? Well, you should ask them. You should say, am I free to leave? Here it is on the Give 'em 5 card. What should you say?
Am I free to leave?
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 If the officer says yes, then you should carefully walk away. You should not run away.
Why can't I run away?
If you suddenly run, then now the officer probably has reasonable suspicion to detain you. And they will detain you, using force if necessary. Remember, safety is your number one priority when contacted by the police, and it's not safe to run from a police contact. But if the officer has told you that you are free to leave, you should also not stay. If you've been told you're free to leave and you don't leave, then you're consenting to the encounter, and your lawyer can't argue later that you were illegally detained. If the officer says no, you are not free to leave, then, well, don't leave. You are being detained and you must stay where you are. If this happens, you might be tempted to ask why you're being detained or what reasonable suspicion the police have. Do not do this. It will only antagonize the police, and if you argue back and forth with the police, you might say something that they will use against you later. If it turns out that they were not justified in detaining you, then your lawyer can argue that later. But at this point, it's very important that you be respectful. Don't give the police any attitude, but also don't say anything other than your name and date of birth. The best way to protect yourself, both physically and legally, is say, I choose to remain silent. When a police officer approaches you, they may ask if they can search you or your belongings, such as your bag. What should you say if a police officer asks to search?
What is probable cause?
The correct answer is, say, I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff. Here it is on the Give 'em 5 card. What should you say?
I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff.
I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff.
What if I say no and the officer searches my stuff anyway?
That's a great question, and the answer is on the next slide. If an officer goes to search your stuff without your permission, do not physically resist or pull your bag away from the officer, but you should make clear verbally that you do not consent. If the officer still searches your stuff, this might be an illegal search. So it is very important that you talk to your attorney about it afterwards. If it is an illegal search, your lawyer can argue to a judge that the police cannot use against you anything suspicious they found during the search. Even if they find something serious like a giant bag of cocaine or a severed head, they're not allowed to use it as evidence in your trial. And if that's the only evidence the police have, they have to dismiss any charges against you, even murder and drug dealing. That's how powerful it can be to properly exercise your rights.
If I haven't done anything wrong, then why shouldn't I let them look in my bag?
You should not give police permission to search your stuff, even if you've done nothing wrong. First, you have a right to keep your stuff private, even from the police. Second, you don't know what the police might think is suspicious. For example, suppose you have a Denver Broncos hoodie in your backpack, and just coincidentally, cops were just told over the radio that a person wearing a Broncos hoodie just robbed a gas station around the corner. Now the cops are going to suspect you, even though you're innocent. So it's better to not consent to a search, regardless of whether you've done anything wrong. Okay, so here's a question you may be wondering about. If you do not consent to a search, is the officer still allowed to search your cell phone? Do you think the answer is yes, no, or only with a warrant?
Yes, always.
No.
Only with a warrant.
The correct answer is C, only with a warrant. A police officer can only look through all the stuff on your phone if they get a warrant. However, they are allowed to simply look at the screen without scrolling or clicking on anything. So if something pops up on your screen, like the notification of a message, they're allowed to look at it. So if you want your messages to remain private, you should disable notifications on your phone.
Am I allowed to record the police on my cell phone?
Yes, you have a right under the First Amendment to record the police in public. But if you do record the police, make sure you do it safely. Do not make any sudden movements and maintain a safe distance from the police while recording. Another situation where you may encounter police officers is a traffic stop. In fact, traffic stops are very common. They make up just over 40% of all police encounters. So when are police allowed to pull over a vehicle? Well, they can pull over a car whenever they have reasonable suspicion that someone in the car has committed a crime or traffic violation. This can be something as simple as speeding, turning a corner without indicating, or having a cracked taillight. If a police officer pulls you over while driving, you must show the officer your driver's license, registration, and insurance papers. But that doesn't mean you have to do everything else the officer asks. Most importantly, you do not have to let the officer search your car. So what should you say if a police officer asks to search your car? You already know the answer.
I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff.
I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff.
I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff.
Exactly. You say, I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff. And you should be careful in situations like this, because the officer may not ask it like an official question. They probably won't say, "Excuse me, ma'am, would you mind terribly if I searched your trunk to see whether you have illegal weapons back there?" Instead, they'll say something casual like, "Could you pop the trunk for me, please?" But either way, you are allowed to say, "No, I do not consent." Another situation where you might be confronted by police is if they come to your home. So, what should you do if police knock on your door?
Ooh! You should turn off all the lights and hide and pretend no one is home.
Actually, you don't have to hide because you don't have to let the police in unless they have a warrant. You don't even have to open the door for them.
How will I know if they have a warrant without opening the door?
If you don't open the door for them, they will tell you if they have a warrant, and they'll tell you that you have to let them in. If they say they've got a warrant, you can ask them to show you by holding it up to a window or sliding it under the door before opening the door. Another question we often get asked is what happens if a parent or guardian is at home? If your parent or guardian lets the police in and the police ask if they can search your room, can the parent or guardian give them consent? In most cases, the answer is yes. Parents and guardians can give police permission to search your room. Even if you're jumping up and down saying, "I do not consent, I do not consent." Unless you're paying rent or have a personal padlock on your door, your parents have the authority over the entire home. So if you're ever in this situation, you might want to do some fast talking with your parents and convince them not to consent. The Fourth Amendment and other constitutional rights don't just limit what police officers on the street are allowed to do. They also limit what teachers, school administrators, and school resource officers are allowed to do. Different schools have different rules for what can be searched, and the rules are different for public and private schools. But in every school, a student can be searched if school officials have reasonable grounds for believing there is either a crime being committed or a violation of school rules. So if a teacher or police officer asks to search your locker or backpack or to empty your pockets at school, what should you say?
I do not consent to your searching me or my stuff.
I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff.
I do not consent to you searching me or my stuff.
Exactly. Depending on the circumstances, they might still be able to search your stuff, but at least you didn't give them permission, and that means your lawyer will be able to argue later that they weren't authorized to do the search. And here it is again on the Give 'em 5 card. Okay, so far we've been discussing the Fourth Amendment and how it limits when the cops can search or detain you. But there are two other very important rights that apply to police. One of these is the Fifth Amendment's right to remain silent. The Fifth Amendment gives you the right to remain silent. That means you do not have to talk to the police, and you do not have to answer their questions. Regardless of whether you're at home, at school, or at the police station. Yet, despite this, 90% of youth and 80% of adults waive this right and answer the cops' questions even though they don't have to. Why do you think this is?
Because young people do not understand their rights.
Because they're nervous or afraid.
Because our parents tell us we should cooperate with the police.
Because we feel pressured to talk or we look guilty if we don't answer their questions.
Those are all excellent answers, and I think they all contribute to people talking and answering questions even when they don't have to. The important thing to remember is that you should never waive your right to remain silent, no matter how much pressure you feel to talk. An important part of the Fifth Amendment are your Miranda rights. If you've ever seen a movie or TV show about cops, you've heard the Miranda rights plenty of times. Do you remember what they are? You have the right to
Remain silent.
Yes. Anything you say.
Can and will be used against you in a court of law.
You have the right to
An attorney.
If you cannot afford an attorney.
One will be appointed for you.
Exactly. And when we say appointed for you, we mean for free. It's not even like a 50% off sale. It means completely free of charge. Police officers don't always have to read you your Miranda rights. If they come up to you on the streets or pull you over while driving, they don't have to read you your rights before talking to you. They do have to read you your Miranda rights when you are both in custody and under interrogation. So what do these terms mean? Well, custody means you're either officially under arrest or feel like you're under arrest, such as you feel like there's no way they're going to let you go without arresting you. And interrogation means any questioning by law enforcement. So if you're being held in custody and being questioned, police must read you your Miranda rights. And when they do, you should say, I choose to remain silent.
But what if I have done nothing wrong?
Shouldn't I answer the questions if I've got nothing to hide?
That's a great question, and it certainly sounds like common sense. But you should remain silent even if you've done nothing wrong. Police are allowed to lie to you. They're trained to lie to you about having evidence against you. So it's easy to get confused or say something that the police misinterpret, or even feel like you have to tell the police what they want to hear. So even if you're completely innocent, you should always choose to remain silent. So what should you say when the police read you your Miranda rights?
I choose to remain silent.
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 That's right. In fact, you should also say a couple of other things as well. You are entitled to a lawyer, and young people are entitled to have a parent present when they're being questioned. So you should first say, I want my parents, and I want a lawyer. But once you've made these requests, you should say out loud, I want to remain silent. Once you invoke your right to silence, the police have to stop questioning you immediately. Now, you might think that the best way to invoke your right to remain silent is to simply remain silent. That is, just sit there and not say a single word. That would be logical. Unfortunately, the law is not always logical. And the United States Supreme Court has ruled that in order to cut off police questioning, you have to actually speak and say out loud that you choose to remain silent. I know this is a strange rule, but unfortunately, I don't get to make the rules. And in case you've forgotten about the Give 'em 5 card, here it is again. You can see that the card lists, I want my parents, as one of the things to remember.
What if my parent tells me to talk to the police?
Do I have to talk then?
It's important to realize that just because you have the right to have a parent or guardian present, that doesn't mean they can force you to talk to the police. These are your rights, not your parents' rights. I bet that if your parents were called down to the police station in the middle of the night, a lot of them might be angry and scared and tell you to cooperate with the nice police officers. That's because most people, including your parents, believe that it helps to cooperate. But they're wrong. I mean, it's not their fault. They haven't been to a Learn Your Rights training. I know it would be really hard to not do what your parents want, but you should still remain silent. And if they're unhappy about it, blame us. Tell them that a lawyer or law professor came to your school and told you that you really must not answer any questions. Another thing that is very important to realize is that anything you tell your parents can be used against you in court. Even if they don't want to, they can be forced to testify. So if you're in trouble with the police, you shouldn't talk to your parents about what happened. So who should you talk to? Well, that brings us to the Sixth Amendment and the right to an attorney. Whenever you are prosecuted for a crime, you have the right to an attorney. If you or your family cannot afford an attorney, you will be provided one for free. The attorney works for you. They do not work for your parents or for the government. They are your resource. If you are charged with a crime, the only person you should talk to about what happened is your lawyer. What you tell your lawyer is protected by attorney-client privilege and cannot be used against you. If you're being questioned by police, in order to guarantee that they provide your attorney, you have to ask for your lawyer very clearly. Just like with your right to silence, you have to say out loud, I want a lawyer. Not, maybe I need a lawyer, or should I have a lawyer here? That's not clear enough. You have to say, I want a lawyer. And here it is on the Give 'em 5 cards. So that's the full presentation. Now you should be able to use your voice and protect yourself and safely exercise your rights whenever you're confronted by police or other officials, whether that's on the street, in your car, at home or at school, or even at the police station. You now know what to say, and just as importantly, what not to say when interacting with the police. And if you're ever unsure, you can always check your Give 'em 5 card. I hope this presentation was useful and informative, and if you have any further questions, feel free to ask.